Okay, so when you were with Hazel, you completed the first part of your color wheel. And what we're going to do in this video is mix the other colors. So what we'll be doing is filling in the colors in between, the secondary colors. And in our case, because we have a color bias color wheel, which is we have 2 yellows, 2 blues, and 2 reds, 1 warm and 1 cool of each, we're going to be mixing based on the color bias. So for the first yellow orange, we are mixing the Pyro Red with Gamboge, but we're going to put more Gamboge in than Pyro Red. And then over here, we're going to mix the Pyro Red with the Gamboge, but there's going to be more Pyro Red. So if that makes any sense. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I've got a tray of leftover paint here, and we're going to use this one. So probably the easiest thing to do is mix it in my palette so that I can show you the differences. So I'm going to mix the 2 of these all in advance. And this is my Gamboge. So I'm going to put a lot of Gamboge down in this case. And then over here, I'm going to put a little bit of Gamboge. So this has a lot, and this has a little bit. So now we're going to rinse our brush, and we're going to go into the Pyro Scarlet. And in this case, same thing. We're going to have a little bit of Pyro Scarlet. And over here, we're going to have a lot of Pyro Scarlet. Now, part of the challenge is trying to mix them the same consistency, because not only do you have one puddle bigger than the other, you also have, you might have thicker paint in one puddle and watery paint in the other. So one of the things I find when I'm mixing on my palette, and this might be particular to my palette, is if it starts to bubble up a bit, I know that I've got the same consistency. So see the little bubbles in my Gamboge? And now I have little bubbles in my Pyro Scarlet. So I'm waiting to the point where I see those little bubbles, and now I know that I have enough. So I'm going to rinse off my brush, and then I'm going to go through the same procedure we went the last time, which is to wet just the bottom portion of my triangle. So I'm wetting the bottom portion, making sure there's no, there's a tiny bit of phthalo still left on my clean brush. So phthalo tends to do that. Your best strategy here is to actually wipe that off, because you really don't want your yellow mixed with your blue, because you're going to end up with green. What I can do is I can take a second brush that's completely clean and start from there. So I'm going to wet this. Now this is going to be my red that has a little bit of orange in it. I'm just going to move this up a bit so that you can see it better. Maybe I'll put some tape on it. Keep it in one spot. Okay. All right, so we're wetting this part down, making sure it's nice and wet, but no bubbles on it. And then I'm starting with my one that has more yellow than red. And I'm going to keep this brush as my, that brush is my completely clean brush, right? so I'm not putting any color on it. And when rinsing your brush off, rinse it in the dirty water, squeeze it, and then rinse it in the clean water and squeeze it into the dirty water. So then you should have a pretty clean brush. So I'm going to mix these two together. And in this case, I should get more yellow, which is kind of a weaker color, than I get orange. And it's probably not yellow enough. When I look at that, I think, well, I'd like a little bit more yellow. And because yellow is not as strong, I'm going to keep putting a little bit. It's got to be darker than this one, but it can't be. So let's try that. Let's go with that. That's kind of probably needs a bit more yellow. So a bit more gamboge. Put that on top because I want it kind of a yellowy orange. Keep mixing that in. I did notice here that it's already dried up. This paper tends to soak in the water pretty quickly. Okay, so that is my... Now these colors, the yellows and oranges, tend to be pretty close in color. As far as secondaries are concerned, like when you look at orange and yellow on its own, they're pretty close in color. So that's our first mixture. Okay, we're going to rinse off our brush again, squeeze it out, put in the clean water, squeeze it out into the dirty. Okay, and then we're going to mix our next color. So this color should, oops, I forgot to wet it. Oh, maybe I already did. This should be more orange than our Pyro Red. It should be darker than this one. It's probably not bad, but I'm going to put a tiny bit more gamboge in there. And now I'm going to put a tiny bit more of the Pyro Red. Okay, and we're just going to wet that one more time. I don't see any water on here at all. Okay, so there we go. So let's start up here. We can straighten out our brush by dragging it across the palette. Okay, and it's slightly redder, but not too red. In fact, it might even, well, it is kind of in between. Like your comparison is, how does this color compare to the two colors beside it? Is it darker than this one or redder than this one? And is it more orangey than this one? So if it's somewhere in the middle, then you're on the right track. But as I said, there's not a huge amount of difference in the yellow and orange colors. You might look at this as this is, you know, more like a, oh, I don't know, an orange, and this one's more like the inside of a grapefruit, or probably not a good comparison. I'll come up with a better comparison than that, but that is the difference between the two. Okay, so that was our two oranges. Okay, and then we're going to move around. Now here we're doing our greens, so you're going to see quite a bit of difference as you go over to your greens. So we're mixing phthalo and Hansa. Again, a lot of Hansa, a tiny, tiny bit of phthalo, because phthalo's a real bully. And then a tiny, tiny bit of phthalo, tons of Hansa. And then the same the other way, just a hint of it. So let's try mixing that on the palette. I'm going to wipe off what I already have. Clean that all up. Okay, so at this point well, definitely after this, you're going to have to change your water. But let's see how we make out here. Make sure this is centered properly. Okay. So let's mix our colors first. We'll just, I think it'd be okay there. And I will have to change my water, so I'll do that. Okay, I am back. Okay, so let's start with the Hansa for both puddles. Now, here you're going to have to get as thick a Hansa as you possibly can. And as big a puddle as you possibly can. So I'm just going right out of the paint. I'm going in like 10, 12, 13 times, as many as I can. And here I got just a little bit. Okay. So that's my mixture there. I'm going to keep going with this, just so I really need a lot of Hansa in order to stand up to that phthalo. Okay, and then my phthalo. Okay, so for the first one, I just want a tiny bit of phthalo. That's probably enough. Let's see how that turns out. Very nice. Okay, so that's a nice emerald green, spring green, whatever you want to call it. Okay, and then rinse that off. And now we're going to go into our phthalo. And that's a bit watery. Okay, I'm just using up all this extra paint. When I made the paint drops for class, this is what was left on the plate when I chipped them all off. So I'm just looking for those bubbles to come up. Okay, so that should be enough. See how that looks. Okay. So that's definitely a turquoise green. And we have our two colors. So what I might do here is start over here, only because my brush is covered in this paint already. So again, I'm wetting it down. Okay, and I'm just going to go wet this part too, because I think, although it might bleed, so I'm not touching too close to it. I think with this paper, it tends to soak all the water in very quickly. Okay, so I'm going to start with the darker color, which had more phthalo in it. Some more phthalo. It should be next to the phthalo. Okay, make sure your colors mix quite well. I'm going to go around, turning the brush around so I get a nice point on it. Okay, and then it's good thickness because it's leaving those little gaps that tells me my consistency is pretty good. Now as I get down here, it's going to start hitting the water. Okay, it's a bit dry, so I might give it a little blast for a second with my clean water. As you can see, it's drier at this part here. Okay, and down we go into the water. Okay, we need to get a nice Hawaiian sea color. Okay, so that is that mixture. Rinse off the brush. Okay, I'm going back, rinsing in my dirty water, going into my clean, wringing it out into the dirty, wringing it out into the dirty. Okay, so I did that a few times, checking here to see if it's wet enough. And now I'm going into this nice emerald green color. Maybe it's not even, it's a yellow green. Maybe it's not even emerald. It's a yellow green. Very springy. Okay. And I do have enough water left here. Okay. So there we go. Okay, so that's that. That was my phthalo, and next I have my ultramarine and my Quinn Rose. So I'll clean off the palette again. Get some paper towel because this is hard to get up. Because my clean water is completely clean, but my dirty water is quite dirty. So once again, we're gonna go change it. Okay, all right, so let's start with mixing the color. So steps: mix, wet triangle, apply paint. So in this case, we are now mixing ultramarine blue, which is our warm blue, with Quinn Rose, which is our cool red. And we're going to get some nice purple tones here. So for this case, you're going to have more ultramarine, less Quinn Rose. And here you're going to have more Quinn Rose, less ultramarine. So let's mix those two up. I think we'll start with the Quinn Rose because it tends to be the lighter color between the two of them. Okay, so we need a big quantity of Quinn Rose. Waiting for those bubbles to start to appear, and there they are. But I probably need a fair amount here, so I'm going to just keep going. Okay, and then I need a little bit of Quinn Rose. Okay, rinse off the brush. Now, since I don't have any ultramarine on that palette, I'm going to use the ultramarine from this palette. Okay, so I need a lot of ultramarine. You see there was a little bit of Quin Rose on my brush there because that color is kind of... Okay. All right. And then here I just need a little bit. Okay. Okay, so let's start by doing, I guess, closest to the Quin Rose, although the angle for me is not that great, so I'm going to turn it once again. So mix these two together and I should get a nice magenta color. Okay, it's a bit too purple. I really need it leaning towards the pink rather than the blue. So I'm going to put some more Quin Rose in here. Yeah, I want it like a magenta fuchsia kind of color, which is what we got here. Okay, so now let's mix that up. Oh, our tape is moving. That's the angle, it's okay. Okay. It's a little weak in consistency on this one. I probably could have put thicker paint on. And it's definitely not wet enough at the bottom there. So it's completely dried out here. Wet this part for a second too. And try not to touch this edge though. Okay, now there's a bit too much water sitting there in a big puddle. So I'm dabbing it off on the brush. And then dabbing it in the towel. Okay, so let's keep going. You see it already dried there. That's why you get where you get these patchy spots where part of the paper is dry and part of it is wet. We'll talk about that a bit further too. Okay, so there is my ready purple. Rinse off the brush. I still have a bit of wet there, so I'm okay with... Oh, actually, I see there's a big spot in there that never got wet. So let's make sure that gets wet. Okay, mix our next combination up. So this one should be more of your typical purple, royal purple. Okay, imperial purple. So it tends more towards the blue. Okay, a little bit weak again as far as the consistency of the paint. If yours ends up really too weak, you can wait till it's completely dry and then apply another layer on top of it if you think it's too weak. That part was dry there. Okay. All right. So I think that's good. Just gonna weaken this a tiny bit at the bottom. Just with a little bit of water, not too much. Okay, so that is our color wheel.